Welcome to From Cover to Code, the Technology Book Club. Join us as we discuss artificial intelligence, DevOps, software development, cloud computing, and more. With your hosts, Angela Andrews and Michael Jenkins. The next episode of From Cover to Code starts now.
And we are live. How are you doing today, Angela?
Hi, I am doing amazing. I dressed for the occasion.
Okay, I love the shirt.
I'm doing awesome. Enjoying my little summer over here in Georgia. Chilling. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Once again, I'm running into the studio today. Los Angeles was blessed to have an AWS Summit here today. So I spent the morning there, fought traffic on the way back home so I can get here in time for the studio. And just the same, just for the show, just the same, I'm running into the studio at the very, very, very last minute. But I'm here. I'm ready to discuss. And yeah, I'm ready to go.
Fantastic. So if you joined us last week, you know we kicked off our read for this season, Terraform Up and Running, the third edition, the latest hotness. We went through chapter 1, which is kind of like an introductory chapter to infrastructure as code, the various tools that are out there, pros, cons, using multiple tools together. It was a really good foundational chapter. Then we went over to chapter 2, where we literally started writing Terraform files and deploying infrastructure. So it was, we came out the gate. We came out the gate. And we, at the end of last week's session, because we were, doing things live, the last bit of infrastructure didn't deploy.
Yeah.
And of course, it was for a myriad reasons. And you were correct about launch configurations being a problem. They had been deprecated. You had to use launch templates, and then you had to refactor. There was quite a bit of options that you had to change. And I just picked it apart, finally understood it, and eventually we got the infrastructure deployed. So we can talk about that, where we left off last week, but we don't want to forget this week's chapter, which is chapter 3. We're talking about Terraform State. And I just read something that said it's one of the most important chapters because nearly every Terraform problem eventually becomes a state problem. So
yeah,
it's a very important chapter.
Yeah, Terraform state is key to the whole get down, because if you lose your state, Terraform can lose all knowledge of what you've deployed or what you're trying to deploy, et cetera, et cetera. So if you don't keep track of your state and don't protect it and manage it in a pretty important way, then you could lose a lot. I won't say you lose everything, because if you deployed some stuff, it's still there, but you'll lose the connection that Terraform has to what's been deployed. So
it's like losing your passport.
Exactly. Or losing your mind.
You can't go nowhere. You can't do nothing. Everything's gone. It's a pretty serious thing. So that's where we are today. And
well, do you want to go over the troubleshooting that you did?
If you'd like, let's do it.
It might be a good place to kick off before we get into state. Okay. I know you put together some materials, so I will bring them to the stage. This is season 5, episode 2, where we're going to discuss some troubleshooting and an error that we saw from the last episode 1 of this season, covering Terraform Up and Running. So where are we starting here? The error that you saw?
Yes, this was the very last error we were troubleshooting on air. And it had something to do with his code referencing and having a launch configuration in there. So I'm going to assume that this text, although the latest version, it is not the most up to date because AWS changed this back in maybe 2023 or 2024, where new accounts can't use launch configs. It's a whole thing. So we had to figure that out. I did. You looked at it and was like, "Oh, it's probably an API change." And I'm like, "Of course he knew that." And so yeah, this is where we left off. We had gotten rid of a bunch of other errors. This was the last one that was plaguing us at the end of last week. So we switched to a little launch template, and not a lot of changes required. This is what the resource block looked like. That was in the book. And if you know a little something about Terraform, you can probably spot, well, one, it's using a launch config, to the security groups. I think I had to change that for it to be the security group of the ALB or something. I had to make a change.
Yeah.
And base 64 is the way user data takes the text of the user data and implements your server. So those were a couple things. I guess if you go to the next slide, maybe that's on there. I tried to keep track of what I changed. Okay.
Yeah.
So, launch template, you had to put in a name prefix. You had to change the security group to security group IDs. And of course, the base 64 tag on the here doc. Trust me, there were a couple other ones. These were probably the biggest. There were little things like I missed something here or missed something there, but this is how we resolved the issues we had from last week.
Cool. And was there might be there's a few more slides.
What do we got? Oh, okay.
The resources that you created, you're pointing out the launch templates.
Yes.
And, the way that's used by the auto scaling group. And of course, Terraform's giving you the play-by-play, what's creating, how long it took to create, and so on and so forth. So that's good feedback as you're watching it in the terminal. Yep. And I think this is a good slide too, just describing it for the folks that are listening, because you're connecting what Terraform is doing in the terminal to what's actually being produced or deployed or visible in the console. So that's a good connection there, I think.
Cool. Now, if you go to the next one, we just added a little razzle dazzle and added the ALB and its accompanying resources and moved the output and variables to an external file. So that required some refactoring as well, because there was quite a few things. I guess it was a few things that were hard coded in inside of the Terraform file. So refactoring that, it finally worked, and we were able to go to the next slide. Let's see what we got here.
Indeed. Web page didn't load. What happened?
Page didn't load because there was something that I think it might have. I don't even remember. Go to the next slide.
All right. We're going to go to the next, because I know you fixed it.
Okay. This is the last fix. There were. I am just laying myself bare here.
That's all
forgot
good.
to add the variable for the target group ARN, so you can see it's highlighted in there. Had to add the health check type inside of the auto scaling group, and then voila, it finally worked. So this felt like very real world. When you're developing IAC, you're testing out all the things, you're trying to get things working. It's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of reading the documentation to understand what some of these options are, if you need them, which ones are mandatory, just all of the things. So definitely a learning experience going through chapter 2. And I wonder what your thoughts were on our troubleshooting and how chapter 2 wrapped up. What do you think?
Yeah, I appreciated being able to work through some of those errors because, again, coming in as somebody who's already familiar with Terraform and thinking about the code that was presented, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to change this, I'm going to change this, and then so I automatically pulled in an AMI. It's an AMI that didn't work with the configuration that the author presented, so I'm like, oh, okay, I'll switch to Ubuntu. So I switched to Ubuntu, and then stuff started to work. So I had similar debugging steps, just kind of working through that after we were wrapped up, just to kind of get everything working with Ubuntu. And then I was able to get to similar thing where I could see the hello world on the website, and everything was working. So yeah, it was good. I appreciated the steps that he took to grow from a single EC2 instance to the auto scaling group cluster to the load balancer and the different resources that kind of came along with that. Yeah.
So if you're reading the book and you look in the table of contents, it literally goes from deploying a single server to making a web server to a configurable web server to a cluster of web servers and then adding a load balancer.
Mm-hmm.
That is literally, if you walk through, say you've never seen Terraform before, and we got Google and ChatGPT as our little tutors, you could really wind up deploying some very valid infrastructure. The only problem is you didn't get to chapter 3 yet, where you're actually doing something about the state, which really lives on your local machine. And that feels like a really good segue into chapter 3, how to manage Terraform state.
Yes, indeed. And I think he started it off pretty good. What he said, let's see, what did he say? How do we know Terraform was able to find the resources it created previously and update them, but how did Terraform know which resources it was supposed to manage? So that's where state comes into play. That's literally what state is. It's a file, a JSON file that Terraform writes out in the previous case to a disk, and then it can reference that as it's making the API calls to figure out what's been deployed, what state it's in, or condition. I'll say, not to confuse terms. And then it can make adjustments according to that. But if you're working by yourself and you're keeping your state file locally on your disk, you're okay. For the most part, you're okay. But if you're working on a team and you have a team member who's working on their laptop and they need to reference those same resources, your Terraform configuration, then you start to experience some difficulties that you need to overcome. And Terraform has some ways to work around it. And I think that was pretty much the evolution of this chapter, where he presented these problems and the ways that we can use the Terraform state configurations to overcome them.
Cool. Great overview.
Yeah, no doubt. He shared the 3 problems that he presented were the shared storage for state files, locking state files, and then isolating state files. So we can kind of get into some of that discussion.
Okay. Let's do it.
Probably the biggest one is the shared storage one. Is the state I keep saying state. I don't want to confuse state, the word, or the literal presence of being, with Terraform state itself. But you have this situation where where you need to work with somebody, and the resources that Terraform has are they're on your local system, so how do you share it with somebody? And so what they have is this backend configuration, and the default backend is to write it to your disk, but you can set up ways that you can put it on a file share somewhere. Since we're working in AWS, the most common way is going to be an S3 bucket, where you write it to an S3 bucket and Terraform reads it from there. And then somebody else can set up their backend configuration the same way. And so that way they're pointing at the same state.
Gotcha. So I'm going to say this again, and this will be the 3rd time I've said it. I'll probably say it again during this season. I took a AWS Terraform on AWS course, and we didn't talk about state.
That's really unfortunate.
S3 was right there, and we never addressed it. And when I say it was the worst 2 days of training I've ever had, this is the good stuff. And when I got to this chapter, again, I had done done a little bit with it. I usually do a lot of POCs
Hmm.
for projects. So I'm really usually not working with someone. So wherever I keep my state, it doesn't matter because I'm going to tear it down anyway, right?
Yeah.
So learning this in chapter 3 was one of those aha moments for me. So I was really glad that we got into this because you saved me 2 days. Well, actually, 2 days were already spent. But what if we'd have done this sooner? It could have saved me 2 days of my life. But
Yeah.
very good chapter overall.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah, and I mean, I appreciated the way that I'm trying to think of what he presented. I don't want to like confuse it with the way that I operate
Okay.
with buckets, but so well, let me try to think about it because well, and I keep saying buckets because that's the way I've always managed my state. I have the local file, but the teams that I've worked on will have a well, okay, that's it, the chicken and egg, because
Yes,
he's like
we talked about
you
that.
can use Terraform to create an S3 bucket, but the state for that bucket is now local. So now you need to move that state itself into the bucket. And there is a process for that where you can update your backend code. Terraform figures it out that says, hey, your backend configuration changed from the last time you ran. Do you want to migrate, to this new state configuration, or you just want to start over from scratch? So you can sort of bootstrap yourself that way, but it's kind of a chicken and egg thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the teams that I've worked with, what we do to kind of get around that is we have a bucket already in place. And then within that bucket, we'll have different sort of, what do I want to say, like namespaces for different applications or projects or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So when we start a new Terraform project, we don't have to create the bucket. It's already there. So we just put that bucket name into the default configuration. And then we fill out the rest of the configuration, which is the key for
Right.
the file location inside the bucket. So that way we namespace it into the project or the environment that we're going to use. And so we kind of step over that chicken and egg scenario. Out of the gate, we're writing our state to S3
Gotcha.
automatically. We never really have to kind of do that dance to get it squared away.
So I guess if you are implementing IAC for the first time, you too will be dealing with this issue. But once it's been established, well, you're going to
Yeah.
have a bucket. You can have your different environments going to a different key. And there you have it. Problem solved. So I think this is just this can be a one-time issue. It may come
Mhm.
up in other scenarios where it could be problematic. I don't know. But the way you just described it makes sense. Once you
Yeah.
set it and forget it, to a certain extent, you always have a place to store your remote state. So,
Yeah.
since we talked about the chicken and egg thing, there's also something that it mentioned, and I'm on the section where let's see, shared storage for state files. We talked about that because it's going to S3. It's suggesting that, of course, you have versioning turned on so you can
Mhm.
keep track of those changes. So just like pushing your TF files to GitHub, making sure you can keep track of your state and the various versions of it is instrumental as well. The whole thing about implementing a DynamoDB table
Mhm.
to ensure locking, that is another thing that we stumbled upon that really is a non-issue anymore because S3 has made some changes
Yeah.
that will eliminate the need to have a DynamoDB table. So that was interesting coming across that little ditty.
Yeah.
What have you transitioned? Were you like on the DynamoDB train and then you were like, we don't do this anymore?
I mean, kind of a mix of both.
Okay.
Some of the first Terraform projects that I was working on, yeah, we used we used DynamoDB for locking. Then honestly, we kind of got away from it because it was just a little bit more overhead that we
Mm-hmm.
had to manage. And we never really had, I mean, knock on wood, the opportunity for conflict because it would be like one person working on a project, still using remote state, stored in S3, but there was nobody else working on that same environment, that same code at the same
Gotcha.
time that would cause the conflict. So if you're the only one, you don't really need to lock anybody else out. It's good
Yeah.
practice, but I got to a point where it wasn't, something that was in my toolbox for every Terraform project that I stood up. But I have not, since S3 introduced this locking, sort of
Okay.
native locking capability. I haven't done any Terraform projects since then. I mean,
Yeah.
with the exception, I guess, the stuff that I'm doing now with reading the book. So yeah, I will take another look at S3 and the locking that it has out of the box, just to see if that's indeed something that Terraform can take advantage of without needing the overhead of a DynamoDB.
Gotcha. So there's one more thing that we lose moving away from DynamoDB to S3. And I want to say lose because that I think is a broad of a term. But because DynamoDB has strongly consistent reads and then S3 has eventual consistency, if you're not working in those huge teams where there's tons of people working in that on those projects, you'd probably never run into an issue with eventual consistency. So I'm going to assume you've never had to worry about that.
No, not at all. Because I will say recently I've worked in environments where I've seen where that could be a problem, but it's mitigated because we were using Terraform Enterprise. So Terraform Enterprise does a good job of, and I guess we didn't really talk about that, these options for remote state storage. There's a lot of options out there.
Oh, okay.
And Terraform Enterprise is one of them. And it does a very good job of queuing up access to the state, particularly for changes. So your plans, you're trying to see what's already out there. It'll schedule the changes from the live state. But then when you go to apply, that state may have changed. So really, before you do an apply in a separate step, Terraform's going to do a whole nother plan so it gets up-to-date information. And if you're trying to apply while somebody else is applying, it's going to queue, the Terraform Enterprise will queue up your apply until that lock essentially is removed.
Okay.
And then it will plan and apply your run again because now you have a lock on the state. So I have seen that where maybe like 2 or 3 different applies are queued up and they have to wait until the lock is removed and then they're applied one after the other in sequence.
What is the downside of that if these applies are queued up?
It depends on the urgency of the apply, but otherwise I can't really think of a downside. If you really need to fix something and somebody's blocking you, but I haven't seen any instances of that where it's like so urgent that you got to cancel somebody else's apply so that you can get yours in.
Okay. I was just curious. They said that they had an example here of moving your local state to a remote backend. So for someone who's doing this for the first time or have done a lot of local development, now you can go into the big leagues and start saving. You can start saving your state to S3 as well. Now, of course, depending on your cloud provider, there, like you said, there are other backends that are available. But because, most of us, meaning you and me, do a lot of work inside of AWS, S3 is where we're targeting. So yeah, anything else we want to talk about? You did talk about Terraform Enterprise. Have you ever worked with Azure?
I have done some Azure Terraform, and it's very similar, even though the terminologies are different. They use a concept called a storage account, which is essentially an S3 bucket. I really wish they had not put account on the description of this thing, because when you say, somebody, hey, create a storage account, they're like, well, I already have an account. Is that the same thing as my Azure account, or do I need a password? No, it's a thing. It's like you just create it. It's a bucket, really. So I have done that. Google Cloud, I've used Terraform against Google Cloud, but I think I use local storage. I didn't use remote storage for that. So yeah, I mean, there's other providers like somebody said one last week, and I'm drawing a blank on the name. Oh goodness, I should have Googled that before I started talking about it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't.
There are other third-party services backend as a service providers that you can use to store your S3
Gotcha.
state and do pretty much the same thing that Terraform Enterprise does for you.
Okay. So we talked about the limitations with the chicken and egg. We talked about having a local state. We talked about, potential issues with having your state in S3 now that DynamoDB is really out of it for state locking. But you made it sound like there's really, really no downside to it. So it's like, go for it.
Yeah, I think so. The one other thing that the author mentioned was secrets, because if you basically anything that you do that's secret in Terraform is written in the state as plain text. So some people may have gotten the idea that, oh, I can just track the state along with my code and just put it in my repo. Well, if you put any sort of keys or sensitive information in your state, then that's going to get written to your repo, and it'll be visible by anybody who has view capability to that particular repo. Whereas if you're writing it to a bucket where it's encrypted natively on the bucket side and decrypted when S3 reads it using the permissions that you give the process, then you don't really have to worry about that as much. There is still a file locally, like a backup copy of your state, so you will have to worry about that file, but hopefully it's on your system. It's not readable by anybody else. And so you can kind of protect it that way.
Gotcha. It mentioned something about workspaces, and that is a term that I had never heard before.
Yeah.
We didn't get it in our Terraform class. So this was, oh yeah, I'm gonna keep shading.
I'm sorry. I did laugh out loud.
I'm gonna keep shading. We didn't, of course, because we've been talking about state. Why would we be talking about workspaces?
It wouldn't even come up. Yeah.
So it allows you to store your state in multiple separate named workspaces. So if you have, dev stage, you can call that workspace and do your configuration from there. I read through it. I was like, oh, it looks like a novel idea. Have you ever used it?
I have. Yeah, I have. And this was honestly one of the points in time that I remember like growing as a Terraform user, like maturing as a Terraform user.
Okay. Tell me more.
Yeah. So we were, and if I recall correctly, some of the projects where we were migrating on-premises code to AWS. So we were crafting these artisanal Terraform configurations for each application, right?
Bespoke.
And so, yeah, bespoke. Exactly. They were, fitted or crafted to fit perfectly every single environment, every single application. So if we had code that deployed the staging environment, we would basically cut and paste that code, copy it to another file space, another folder, or whatever case is, and then we would run it there. So now we have two copies of the same code, and we ran into issues where you're trying to do search and replace on code and the namings are wrong or you're missing something. Maybe you missed that state, the back end. So now this other stuff is right into the back end or whatever case is. The biggest problem is you're duplicating code. You're not keeping yourself dry or keeping the configuration dry, which is don't repeat yourself, right?
Put a pin on dry. I got
it. Okay, I'll put a pin on dry. So what we found is that we could use the same code, make those same modifications, still not the most mature use of it, but at the same time, we can use workspaces because now we're not making any changes to the code. We can just say, hey, Terraform, use this particular workspace, start out with the default, maybe that's the development environment, and then create a staging workspace. Now that's the staging environment, and then create a production workspace, and that's for production environment. And then within the code, we can use Terraform's very specific workspace variables. So if we had any resources that were named based on the environment, we could give it a name properly using that variable. So that worked out really good. Okay. And I think we learned a lot about that. The next evolution in that process is using modules, which really, really streamlines your development. So, but we'll get to that in some chapters down the road. But using modules and using workspaces really does make Terraform workflows very efficient.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Let's see. So we talked about that. He did talk about, how your file structure should be
Yeah,
laid
I was
out if you're
just
working in
about to say.
multiple environments. And let's get back to the the typical file out. He said something about typical, and typical is
Mhm.
having a different environment for stage and test and dev and prod and all those things. And that makes perfect sense because you want to be able to segregate your environments because you do not want to make those mistakes. And he also suggested one more thing. Configure different backends, use
Yeah,
different credentials. So you will not run the risk of making a weird mistake because you were in the wrong folder or something
yeah,
like that. So isolation via file layout is a possible thing if you're doing something, but he takes it one step further and it's like, yeah, you can have it in different locations, but you can also separate it in more secure ways. Like I said, the keys and credentials and different backends, segregating it just that much more. What's your experience with that?
yeah, for sure. If you really, really want the best isolation that you can possibly get, use different accounts. That's just like straight up the best way to do it because the code can live in the same repo. But now, if you're saying I'm logging into this particular account and I'm going to access the code, I'm going to run
Mhm.
Terraform apply. It's applying, say account A, and then log in or you set your credentials to account B, and you run Terraform plan. It's like I haven't deployed anything. It's a brand new space.
Who are
Apply
you?
that, yeah. And now these are two totally
Yeah,
separate uh, you know, environments, accounts even. And that's even like security really loved it when we did that because say if you have an exposure in your staging account, then the production account is still good. Like you don't have to rotate
right.
credentials, you don't have to do anything like that. Staging account, you can blow it away, start over, that might come with some grief, but it's not going to disrupt operations across the board. Where if you have your development, staging, production, all environments in the same AWS account, and those account credentials are compromised, then you have to make so many more changes.
Yeah.
They're amplified. So yeah, if you can separate by account, then that's great. And even in those accounts, we still use workspaces,
Oh,
separate
wow.
account.
So a little bit
Yeah,
more. Okay.
yeah. So and I guess we got to the point where workspaces were just sort of a default approach for us because even if the account, and I'm trying to think back, a lot of it was tied to the branches of the code that we were working on. So we would name branches after the environment that we're working in.
That makes
So
sense.
that branch is tied to the account. So, and really that helped us in automation because a lot of, the variables and stuff that you have to pass at the command line, you it can set things up. So Terraform knows how to develop these values based on the variables, like I said, the workspace name or something like that. And it just kind of works. It helps automation so much more where you don't have to change anything. It just works.
Cool. So the book also talks about the advantages and of course clear code isolation. There are huge advantages to doing
Mhm.
things in this very isolated and having this file structure, but the downsides or the drawbacks they mentioned, um, it prevents you from creating your entire infrastructure in one command. Now he also said that you probably shouldn't do that, right? You should segment
Mhm.
in the earlier chapter. You should really not have all of your infrastructure. Say if you had one AWS account and you were deploying all of the things, VPC, storage,
Mhm.
databases, and whatever, that's probably not a good idea because we talk about modularity. That
Yeah.
feels like the opposite of it. So putting all your components in separate folders, yeah, if you needed to, you're going to have to run Terraform apply against each one. But then they have this tool called TerraGrunt where you can do a run
Mhm.
all. And the third thing, this is the third thing that I came across in this chapter, or at least since we started reading it, that was slightly out of date.
Mhm.
Um, it was just a switch. It was just an option on the TerraGrunt command. Something had changed
Mhm.
probably from when he wrote this to current day. So it happens all the time, but you still
Mhm.
run your plan, your apply, and when you're done with it, you still do your destroy. So isolation is a good thing. Isolation is a good,
Yeah.
and modularity. Those two things, those are my
Yeah.
takeaways so far.
Yeah. It definitely helps, all of that.
What else we got here?
Let's see. Let me go back to my notes here. State file isolation. Remote state. That's
Yes.
about as far as I got as far as reading and applying some of the exercises from the chapter. And
Mhm.
I will say, I understand remote state. I understand some of the uses of it, but I have never, ever had the occasion to use remote state in the way that it was described in the book, where one
Okay.
project references another project based on its Terraform state saved to a backend somewhere.
That's
Um,
interesting.
yeah, I've never, ever, ever had to do that. And it feels kind of weird to me.
Yeah.
I would much rather have the whatever Terraform project that I need to reference, write whatever value I need to consume somewhere else to a parameter store or to a
Okay.
secret manager or somewhere else where I can pick it up from there, because reading it from Terraform state just feels dangerous to me.
It
It's
does,
like,
but it's only
yeah,
read only. There's no, you can't cause any harm
yeah,
using
yeah,
what was it called? Remote state.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that I
remote
had
state.
that
Yeah.
concern too until I read a little bit further. And I'm like, oh, I guess that's not a bad thing. But it also something I wrote down dry. So when you're utilizing, you said something about modules will help you with keeping your code dry. But to me, so far, and just like if you didn't use remote state, there might be something duplicate somewhere that you may have in a different environment, and it's the exact same thing you need in a different in this environment. And that runs counter to don't repeat yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say that there's probably instances where dry-ish is probably okay.
Hmm.
But understanding the why behind segregating your code is it probably outweighs the downsides.
Yeah, yeah, probably. I can see that. But one example I could think of is our projects that I worked on was the VPC. So we would have separate VPCs, like non-prod or non-production VPC for development staging, and then a production VPC for production environments. And we would reference, we had a Terraform stack for our VPC, kind of like that global state that they described early in the
Yeah.
book, and we've deployed that and we never ever touched it again. It was just like, do that one time, the network's not
Don't
going
do
to
it
change.
again.
Yeah, and we never run Terraform plan, Terraform apply, whatever, unless we absolutely positively had to, because we didn't want to risk any changes on it. So we could have said in our other projects, reference the Terraform state for the VPC
Mm,
from this S3 location. But again, we didn't really need to, because we could get the VPC ID, and with the VPC ID, you can create a data resource
right.
in your project, and then Terraform just pulls all that information in natively, and it's so much cleaner. It's so
Uh,
much easier to reference, because you get the full functionality of a VPC resource without having to read every single value from the state. And maybe you can, and I don't know, because I've never done it. But again, to me, it just feels much more, I don't know, much more, I don't even know how to describe it, other than just like, it just feels unright to me. Like, it
it
feels
feels, yeah.
ethically wrong to read from Terraform state somewhere.
So I'm wondering if anyone listens to this and you have come across a use case where
Yeah.
using the remote state was a viable option for whatever project you were working on, let us know, because neither of us are like, why
Yeah.
would you
I
do
would
that? So
love
we
to
would
hear
like to hear
examples.
exactly what the use case was and why you used it and what your experience was.
Yeah.
So definitely keep us posted. Um, anything else on this bad boy?
No, that's it. I know that you may have read a little bit further ahead than me, and you got something towards something at the end of the chapter
Yeah.
that gave you some pause, so we can chop up about that if you like.
Okay. All right. So I wrote my notes in the margins of the book. I
Mm,
didn't write separate notes in a notebook. So as I was reading, I said, wait a minute, there's something about built-in functions where you could and where you could, what do we call it? What do we call it? Um, I'm losing my, where you can execute an expression, and it's kind of like you can again, I don't even want to try to explain it, because after understanding remote state and how it's used and how you configure it, I was so good. And then I get to this page, they're talking about built-in functions, and I'm like, well,
mhm,
when would you ever? Now, the example that they gave was for using your user data section of your instance,
mhm,
and saying, well, I'm going to refer to the database's address and port so I can authenticate with it. So if you're deploying part of a multi-tier 3-tier architecture, and you need to talk to the back end, you can pull this from the remote state, right? That was a use
mhm.
case for it. And then it starts talking about these built-in functions. And again, as I'm sitting here looking at this paragraph, I'm like, I have no idea what this means. I don't know what it's useful for. I don't know why you would use it. I don't even, what's a template file function? Like, so have you used Terraform functions? Like, give a
Yes.
girl a bone here, because
Yes, indeed. Template files and like the Terraform built-in functions are very, very useful for writing portable code or making your code more parameterizable.
okay,
Um,
I like
because you
that word.
can basically, like the example that he's using is the template file. You can write a file in such a way that you could use it across projects. Like in this case, he's saying, pull in the database port and address,
Yeah,
passwords, username, all that kind of stuff. You can write a template that you could use for different projects with different databases, different, users, passwords, or whatever, and you
right.
don't have to modify that file. If the usernames and passwords are already set and created in the project, then you just use this template to inject them wherever you need to inject them. In this case, in the user data, and it's just an easy way for Terraform to let you, like I said, parameterize stuff in your project. So it just makes things portable. And there are other functions as well. I'm just kind of scanning through the chapter. I really wish he had taken the time to break out, and maybe he does later on in the book. Maybe this was just an instance where he just needed to introduce something very quickly.
Mhm.
But I think Terraform functions by themselves need more exposure, like more in-depth discussion than just saying, "Oh, hey, here's a function, here's how it works, and this is how we're going to use it." Breaking it down would be much more helpful, along with a list of the functions that you can use.
Okay. I think I agree with you 100%. The use cases didn't grab me. They
Mhm,
didn't, I couldn't see my way through as to, well, why would you do this? Or, I
mhm,
mean, if there are more functions, they probably, and they're as important as you state that they are, a little bit more care and explaining probably should have been done. But my guess is he's not going to focus on it much. He kind of talked about
mhm,
it. Yeah, it's a thing, do your research on it if you find a use for it. But like so many other things are detailed very well. This was kind of glanced over. So if you're hearing this and you've listened to Mike talk about, well, yeah, I could kind of see where this is very useful. Um, you've used them, you've seen their value. Uh, keep reading up on them, because that's what I'm going to have to do,
mhm.
because I didn't get anything from that. So that was it. That was the right before the end of the chapter for me.
Yeah,
So I stopped on a low note. I was like, oh man, come on. So
yeah,
anyway, the conclusion, what are our takeaways? State is awesome. Remote state is S3 state, local state,
yeah.
no. S3 state,
Yes.
yes.
I think out of the box, no matter what you're doing or how you're doing it, projects, simple projects, working with teams, working in enterprises, et cetera, whatever, small company, big company, you need to have remote state. It's just, and it's more secure in the sense that if you're writing your state to a file and to your laptop and your laptop crashes,
Ooh.
you lose that state. You've lost references to all of your cloud resources, right? Now, I guess one thing we didn't discuss, there are ways to capture the state of resources that have been deployed and realign them with Terraform. It's not a fun process.
Okay.
It is
It
not
sounds
fun
messy.
at all. Yeah, it is pretty messy, but you can import things that have already been deployed into Terraform. But
Okay.
it's again, I don't want to go into all the messy details. Maybe we can save that for story time for another time. But it is possible. But the better course of action, put it in an S3 bucket.
Gotcha.
Simple. Yeah.
So in conclusion, the takeaways are isolation is great, locking is great, putting it in S3 is great, and having more safety mechanisms in place, meaning maybe your file structure or using separate accounts, separate credentials to make sure accidents don't happen like that. And be careful, because when you have problems with IAC, like bugs, those bugs can bring your infrastructure down. So
Yeah.
being very mindful as to where you're running and what environment you're working in. I took my takeaways were, and what I'm going to look for in the IAC repos that I'm reviewing at work is, how are they segregating? Like, I mean, so far things are all over the place. Things are in separate folders, different environments. So I'm really getting a feel for it. But I'm going to look a little bit closer as to, well, where are you putting the state, and are you using the same credentials across all? So I'm going to, now that we've read this chapter, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper, and learn a bit more about some of these ADOs and their infrastructure. So another teachable moment with Cover to
No doubt.
Code. You know, it's really helping me do my day job, and I love that. So
yeah, and that's what's up. That's what we're here
that's
for.
it for me. I mean, 3 was a blast.
Okay. Cool. Same for me. I mean, again, experience with it. It was good to work through the exercises and kind of understand the chicken and egg thing, and think about or reflect on the ways that I've kind of overcome that by having dedicated buckets, or buckets that have already long been deployed, and just reusing that bucket across projects with different keys and so on for the Terraform state. So yeah, that was probably one of my biggest takeaways. Just like, go ahead and make that bucket, get it out of the way, and then just keep using that bucket across the board for all your other projects. Just make sure your state is unique inside that bucket.
Okay. That sounds awesome. We did it.
All right. We did. That's a wrap up of chapter 3, how to manage Terraform state. And so next week, we will be getting into building with Terraform modules. And that's going into chapter 4 of the book, what are modules, how to create a basic module, how to make a module configurable with inputs and outputs, local values, version modules, module gotchas, using modules to define reusable, configurable pieces of infrastructure. So yeah, that's really once you get to that, when you're using modules, when you're using remote state and you're using modules, you are a very established Terraform user.
A word.
Yep.
Okay.
That's what I'm going to say.
All right. Well, I'm looking to becoming an established user.
There we go.
I'm looking forward to chapter 4 next week. Have you peeked? Have you seen anything in there that you're interested?
Yeah, I haven't looked ahead yet. You know me, I'm not really too much of a like, ooh, what's this chapter going to do? Like, I don't read ahead too much. I like to be surprised and just kind of find my way through the material as it's presented to me. So no, I haven't looked ahead quite yet. Maybe I'm going in with some preconceived notions, though. I'll say that, with the way that I've worked with modules, the way that I've worked on teams that have shared modules, the way that I've looked at open source projects. The Cloud Posse group, and I'll share their URL here if I can in the chat. They curate I can't even count them, hundreds of modules, open source for anybody to use. And they have their approach to how these modules are developed and used and shared across projects, interoperatively. You know what I'm saying? They use them
I know
together.
exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how people use Terraform modules across the board. Yeah. So I'm
Gotcha.
eager to see, look at it from a new perspective and maybe put some of my biases and
Okay.
past usage to the side and see how I can renew it.
And you know what? You might learn a thing or two. Who
I just
knows?
might learn
Who
something.
knows? Okay. Well, I'm excited.
Cool.
Will I see you next week?
You know what? Yeah, I think we're still on for next week.
Okay.
What's next week? Is that the 17th? Yes, we're still on for the 17th.
Awesome.
So
I'll be here
yeah,
with bells
I will
on.
be here ready to talk about Terraform modules.
Me
So
too.
that
I'm
is what
actually
it is.
looking forward to this section. The book I've been looking forward to like forever. And the fact that we're finally reading it,
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, this is what I've been waiting for. So I'm
Yeah.
really excited about. And I haven't really looked ahead. Like I'm flipping through pages, but what am I really looking at?
Mhm.
It looks like it's about 24 pages long, which is short for this gentleman's chapters
True.
so far,
Yeah.
because he'd been knocking them out. Like, okay, are we done
Yeah.
this? No, here's a new topic. So it's a smaller chapter. I'm excited to see what gems we're going to pull out of this one. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. Likewise.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you for listening. If you joined us live, thank you. If you're listening after the fact to a replay, we appreciate you. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you want to hear. Tell us what you want us to read next. Like we're like open books. We don't care.
It's never too soon to talk about the next book.
Oh no. I'm always looking ahead. I'm already thinking about what I'm gonna have for dinner tomorrow. Like I'm
There you go.
always looking ahead. So let's figure that one out. And thanks for rocking with us.
Indeed. Thanks. We'll see y'all.
See you, everybody. Got my
Bye.
uniform on.
There we go. Cover the code.
Bye, everybody.